Well, hey there, everyone. I am here today with James Shepard and Dora Bronston. I wanted to come to you guys live today to talk about an issue that is near and dear to me and an issue that impacts the two people who we have here, Dora and James, and may be impacting, in fact, I can tell you for sure, impacting quite a few individuals who are veterans. And that issue is service-connected PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. And so I want to share with you some things regarding those issues. But first I need to just make sure that the video is operating properly. And I also need to make sure I grab my notes over there. Good. The video looks like it's working properly. And I want to, first of all, let me give you some context, give you some background about this issue of service-connected PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And I want to talk about why it's so important to me as well. So first and foremost, the issue concerning aid and attendance to veterans is associated with what's happening to people who are veterans who are in active combat. Oftentimes they will sustain injuries. And some of those injuries are injuries that you can't see. You have the kind of injuries that people sustain when they lose a limb, and of course everybody can see how it might impact somebody who loses an arm and a leg, because they're the people who are parked in the handicapped spaces, and you'll see them with whatever devices that they need in order to get around. But for somebody like James, for example, who sustained a service-connected injury, or like Dora's husband, Lafayette, who also sustained a service-connected injury, you may not be able to see the impact that those kinds of injuries have on people. If somebody sustains an impact to the brain, such as Lafayette, one of the things that, and I'm going to let Dora tell you a little bit about that impact, but I will say that this issue impacts about 11 to 20% of every 100 veterans. And the VA reports that there were more than 6,000 veteran suicides each year from 2008 to 2016. And in 2016, the suicide rate was 1.5 times greater for veterans than for non-veteran adults. And they're associating these suicides oftentimes to the traumatic brain injuries and also to PTSD that is associated with the service-connected injury. So more than 413,000 service members since 2000 have experienced brain injuries from a variety of causes. And I want to start with Dora Bronston, whose husband, Lafayette, is he's dying right now from a service-connected injury. And I want her to tell us a little bit about her husband's injury and some of the challenges she faces and Lafayette faces because of this whole thing about aid and attendance and not being able to get access to resources that they need. So Dora, you want to tell us a little bit about Lafayette and what's happening with Lafayette?
Sure. My husband, as you said, is dying. He has been diagnosed with liver cancer. He has had PTSD from injuries occurring in Vietnam. He was a Marine and on the front lines, so he put his life on the line, on the front lines, and direct hand-to-hand combat with the enemies. He's been around explosions. And you can tell that because he still has shrapnel metal coming out of his back. And the one psychological evaluation doctor notated that he probably had a TBI, traumatic brain injury, close enough to an explosion where he had shrapnel in his body, but no one ever put it in his record. No doctor ever put that in his records to show that he had more injuries than you could physically see. In the last few years, he's been suffering from a memory loss. He's had some problems sleeping, night sweats, waking up, remembering combat and fighting, those kinds of things. He goes out in the back property and he's on the North 40 on the watch out, where he's looking for the enemy, making sure we're safe, locking doors, making sure windows are locked. And so you see that the PTSD shows up in his behavior and his mannerisms. He doesn't like to be in public a lot with a lot of people and a lot of noise because it disturbs him. He's just been a loner that way. So with that all being said, when he started to get the dementia, when his memory, when his PTSD got worse, then the memory loss comes with it. It escalates. And you can see the decline of him remembering names and events, things like that. Well, when I went to this doctor visits with him, the doctor would give him a little mini test and ask a few questions and even give him answers and give him a choice of answers to make him answer the questions correctly and then say he's all right. So for a long time, I asked to have him evaluated. And finally, in 2018, he was evaluated, but by that time, Lafayette already had severe dementia. So the slippery slope had already gotten too steep. And he had also had cancer and had surgery. Well, when he was in Camp Lejeune, he drank the water, and of course, all the toxins in the water, the side effects show up as carcinoma in different places in your body. So by the time they recognize it, the cancer is already there. And when they did surgery, they said, oh, well, he doesn't have active cancer. And that's your answer. So now that the cancer returned, then when you want to file a claim, the people that you file a claim with, those people act as though they don't want to take your claim. And that's their job. Their job is to accept your claim and have it processed. So I've been in a whirlwind for about 8 months now that he's diagnosed to die. He's gone beyond the 6 months. But right now, I'm still trying to appeal. They won't give him aid in attendance. They've said that he's totally disabled, but they don't pay him on a pay scale as being totally helpless, totally disabled, in an institution where he's locked in and needs 24/7 care. And so some of the evaluation language reflects that maybe he has a mild or significant memory loss.
So I'm gonna just ask you a couple of questions regarding his need for aid and attendance. Tell me a little bit about what does aid and attendance mean? What kind of assistance would aid and attendance provide for your husband that he's not currently getting?
Okay. A little while ago, I could have gotten paid for taking care of him 24/7 like I had to. I could not leave him at home. I couldn't get anybody to come in. And finally, last year, an agency came in for a few months and sent a nurse in to check on him, check his vitals, 1 day a week for about 10 or 15 minutes.
So not having aid in attendance actually effectively prevents you from being able
Prevents
to
me
work
from work,
and earn your own income.
my own income, my own social life, my career goals, all of my dreams, goals, careers, whatever I wanted to do, I couldn't do.
Okay, so that's just one of the things that aid and attendance would cover the cost for. And I know from talking to James, and I'm going to turn to James for a minute and we'll talk a little bit more with you. I want to talk to you, James, a little bit about your own experiences and what aid and attendance, why it's important to you and to your life, and how it helps you on a day-to-day basis.
In my case, I got hit with shrapnel when I was in Vietnam, and fact, my anniversary was yesterday, February 4th, 1968. And at the time, I got
You served in what branch of the military?
in the Marine Corps.
Oh, so you're a Marine as well?
And I got
Okay.
wounded in the Tet Offensive when that was popular and well-known, publicized. And so I got hit there. And I was spent from February 4th in the hospital until June of 1968. And I came home a little bit for convalescent leave while I was healing up. And so I never did, after I got released from the hospital on June 10th, I really was due to get out of the service in August 14th, so I never really returned to my duty station to really see how it affected me and anything. So when I was discharged, my family noticed it right away when they come to visit me. My personality had changed and the things that I was experiencing, they noticed it. So
But you yourself didn't know, you weren't.
I didn't have any idea that I had any problems like that, and so I got out and I was in communications in the Marine Corps, and you know, so when I got out, I got a job working for with the Ohio Bell at the time, and was familiar with most of the stuff like that. But they noticed right away that when they would try to teach me some new things or different stuff that I had a little bit more difficulty in learning new information. They noticed it right away, so it showed up on the job quite a bit. But the main thing is that I got married shortly after I got out of the service, and my wife always took care of paying the bills and everything, your dating living goes like that. And so she took care of those day to day. It's like what they call a need aid in attendance is if you're talking about a traumatic brain injury, PTSD, you would need assistance in your paying your bills, cooking, cleaning, shopping. In my case, if I was cooking on the stove and got distracted, I'm not leaving it on and the fire hazard. So that's the kind of things that, whereas if you have a physical injury, you would need it for dressing, feeding, and going to the bathroom. And that's where the VA is really lax on giving guys with TBI and PTSD. If you have the loss of limbs and blindness, they call it aid in attendance, and they'll pay for your family members, and they'll pay you a certain amount of money. In addition, they'll give you the services. And like in my case, once I got a divorce, and they determined that it wasn't safe for me to live by myself without assistance in instrumental activities of daily living, cooking, cleaning, shopping, making and bills and things like that. So, and they kept telling me for years that you don't get that unless you're unable to dress and feed yourself. But as far as cognitive impairments, they took me down forever before I finally got Service Connected and got paid for being needing aid in attendance. And then I was supposed to get the assistance through the Dayton Medical Center, and it was just difficult to get it because their attitude is if you can dress and feed yourself, you don't get aid in attendance, and that's the problems that we're having. I would get my own care, and then they'd take it away. Just depend on whoever you talk to, and it's just very difficult if you've got something that they can't see, and the person depends on who you're talking to. If they don't think you need it, you don't get it, and there's no standards that they use to help veterans with and the symptoms of PTSD and traumatic brain injury. A lot of the symptoms are the same. So to determine it, they have to evaluate you for what the diagnosis for PTSD, what the symptoms are for PTSD, and it has to be significant to have a mental disorder, PTSD. So that means if you have a significant impairment, that means that would cause the average person with your disability a serious employment handicap. And so that's how they would determine it. And then if you got a traumatic brain injury, there's certain symptoms you have to have a brain injury. And then again, they would document how much of a memory loss do you have. In my case, originally they give me like a 30% for PTSD. They're saying I have a mild memory loss, which would cause the average person a serious reduction in earning capacity. So you could get paid at the 60% rate of pay. That's what you should get paid. But they'd pay you for your function impairment instead. Then when they finally found out I had a traumatic brain injury, they would go through the same test to see if I met the brain injury diagnosis, and then they would give you a general rating for that too.
So let me just be clear about something, because from talking, I've been working with Dora and James here for a number of weeks to try and help with this process for Dora and James, but not just for them, but for all veterans who face a similar circumstance. And James, one of the things that you shared with me is that you lost your job as a result of your brain injury, and you were working for the phone company, correct?
I worked for the phone company from 1969 until 1989. I'd lost so much work, and they had noticed so much trouble. They noticed me having trouble learning new information, and they went to computer systems. It made it very difficult for me to stay in the workforce. And so finally, I'd missed so much work that it was for PTSD. They had never diagnosed me with a head injury yet. It was PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said that because of me having trouble, and they actually made accommodations to make sure I wasn't left alone to do job tasks,
Mm-hmm.
except they did them like once every 6 weeks. And when they went to give me wanted to give me a medical retirement, they said that actually they didn't make reasonable accommodations, and the government came in and found them. They did everything they could. When you look back, they was a big company, but they still made me take care of the offices without being, and so they found them in default. But at that time, they made sure I got my Social Security, and they gave me a pension, and I agreed with them to go ahead and take the retirement. I could have probably made them go back to work, but they had done about everything they could. I worked there from 1969 till 1989. So then I went to get my total rating for PTSD, and the VA would not give me a total disability rating, even though I was under the work before. It took me a couple more years to get that.
So I want to just share with people, for those people who don't understand the impact of PTSD, for one, some of the things that scientists have said, doctors have said, medical doctors, is that oftentimes with PTSD, that the veteran, much like Lafayette experienced, will continue to re-experience the initial trauma, and they'll oftentimes avoid certain activities, especially things that are difficult emotionally, and places and things that remind them of the trauma that they sustained. Loud noises will oftentimes impact them. They'll have increased arousal and feelings of anxiety oftentimes, like being jumpy, having difficulty sleeping, and being irritable. And Dora has told a number of stories about her husband. They might experience angry outbursts or have negative changes in their moods and thinking. And let me just give you a personal story and to tell you why this is so near and dear to my heart. First of all, I do have a grandfather who also, having been in the Army and served in the Army, sustained some brain injuries. And in fact, my grandfather has passed away at this point, but he did suffer dementia as a result of his brain injuries. And so for those people who don't know, people with PTSD are 3 times more likely to experience the dementia as a result of the injuries that they sustained from active combat. So my grandfather was one of those people who did indeed sustain those injuries. And I can remember a few years back, before my grandfather passed away, when he was losing his memory, and he looked perfectly fine. He looked like himself. And I said to my grandfather, I said, "Grandpa, do you know who this is?" And I pointed to my mom, who is his daughter. And my grandfather said, "To be honest with you, I don't know who any of you are." And he had no memory or no recollection even of his own child and his own grandchildren. And so that's a very painful experience for family members. So I can only imagine, what it is you're going through currently. I remember my mom cried after that, and, we really felt sad for her, but moreover, just the realization of the diminished capacity that he had to do his ordinary functions and tasks, and to even know who he was or know where he was. And so for him and for other veterans who need care and constant care on a daily basis, this issue of aid and attendance is extremely important. And recently, the idea of traumatic brain injuries sustained by veterans or sustained by people who are currently in active combat came up when the Defense Department disclosed right before January 25th is when it really hit the news, when they disclosed that 34 U.S. service members currently serving have been diagnosed with concussions or traumatic brain injuries after the Iranian ballistic missile strike. And the president said, oh, they just had a headache. And so I saw this article that said traumatic brain injuries aren't just headaches, Mr. Trump. And so the impact of those serious brain injuries are in the stories that you're telling now. Your real life examples of what happens when veterans aren't able to get the care that they need, or even the resources to take care of themselves because they're not able to work anymore, they're not able to do for themselves. Now, I know you had shared with me that even though your husband is in a 24-hour facility and they determined that he's not eligible for aid and attendance, you had shared some challenges that he's had in the nursing home. You want to talk about that just for a second?
Sure. Yes. I went to the liaison, the dating liaison, contacted her after a staff meeting with the social worker and the director and some of the nursing staff. And I was concerned that my husband had lost his dentures and they had been missing, the upper denture had been missing for months. They had not ordered that. I also was concerned why he was not being taken care of with a shave and a haircut, just his personal care. His nails, shave, haircut.
And these are things he can't do for himself
He can't do for
because
himself.
of his injuries.
His injuries and the Alzheimer's unit, you can't have scissors and clippers and, things that would be dangerous for them. So their care is all on the staff members. They wash them, put them in the shower, and they have to really force them to take care of their own grooming. They either won't do it or they can't do it. So Lafayette may not have wanted to get a shower for days, so they don't force him. He doesn't want to change his clothes, and they don't make him. Well, okay, then he needs his nails clipped, and he needs his hair cut, and he's got a real scuzzy beard. So I called the VA because the social worker says, you'll have to call the VA regarding those things. Although that's personal care, it's personal hygiene. So I was told that if I wanted a haircut for my husband, I had to pay for it.
Right. That's what I was going to ask.
Nobody gave me an answer why there was no regular grooming service for the beard or his nails, which have grown out much longer than mine, and he never would wear long nails. He didn't like that as a man, as a Marine. So these are the basic things that are challenges. Keeping him well dressed, keeping him well groomed, smelling good, those things.
So it's really a quality of life issue at this point.
Quality of daily life.
And you're in a different city. He's in a different city. Because you don't have a hospital, veterans hospital in your city. So she's having to drive out of town and to get there and then find her husband ungroomed, unshaven. And so let's talk a little bit about, and we're almost done here. I just wanted to actually bring your stories to the forefront. I want people to know the importance of what's happening with our veterans and how we can support the efforts of the veterans. And so we had an opportunity to have a conversation with Sherrod Brown's office to kind of talk about this issue. We have spoken with the current legislators, and for people who don't know, first and foremost, I am running for U.S. House of Representatives in the 8th District, so in Butler, Clark, Dark, Miami, Mercer, and Preble counties. I think I said Butler, and Preble counties in Ohio. And so Dora and James actually reached out to me for help because they've had difficulty trying to get these services and trying to get legislators to listen to them and to help them with these kinds of issues. So this is something that as soon as I heard it, the realization that it had actually impacted my family, but moreover, that it's impacting so many veterans who have been in active combat. And, you know, these veterans make a commitment to put their lives on the line to fight for our country.
Right.
And, you know, I've heard so many veterans say that it's actually frustrating for them to hear people say, thank you for your service. And it almost seems disingenuous, I've heard. James, do you feel that way? How do you feel when people thank you for your service?
Well, sometimes maybe I like it a little different because we wasn't thanked. And it was because what we went through that caused them to thank the Iraqi veterans and Afghanistan veterans. But they're the ones that talk to people, do you need to go back and thank the veterans? You can be mad at the government for sending you off to war, but don't be mad at the veterans. Half the veterans that went to war was drafted. I joined the Marine Corps. I wanted to be in the Marine Corps, and I'm not sorry I joined the Marine Corps, but half the guys there wasn't out there because they wanted to. They was there because they were drafted and served their country. So you can be mad at the government, but you shouldn't be mad at the people that goes do it.
That goes and serves. And in fact, I mean, if it weren't for our veterans putting themselves on the front lines, you know, where would we all be? You know, we'd all be in trouble. Our domestic safety is at risk.
Our attitude, our attitude was like, I'd rather go and fight in another country for everybody's freedom than have them fight in my backyard.
Yes, our soil and domestic
See,
soil.
that's where a lot of people forget that you said, well, they go over there, like World War II veterans, they went over there and the whole world owes them, well, if you'd be speaking Japanese or German if it wasn't for the World War II veterans.
Yes.
In Vietnam, we wasn't fighting for the country. Vietnam had attacked us. We were fighting for each other's lives, but so that you wouldn't have to, they wouldn't be coming over and fighting in our country. So we sacrificed our lives to go over there to fight, and we wasn't being attacked, but we were fighting communism and other governments, and it was better to go fight over somewhere else and protect their rights too, and we wouldn't have to be fighting in our backyard. That's
And so I do sincerely appreciate the service that our veterans provide for us. And the other thing I think people should understand is that we do have a draft system in this country. And so where today it's maybe James who volunteered to serve, and I don't know if Lafayette volunteered.
Volunteered to go.
So it was James and Lafayette volunteered to go, but we do have a selective service in this country. And so people can be drafted. So it could be anybody's son who is of age. At 18 years old, they register with the selective service.
Right.
And so I think it's an important enough issue that we need to all be concerned about what happens with our people who are drafted and who might have to go and fight for this country. We need to make sure that the rights of veterans and veterans' families are taken care of, because you know, the service-connected injury happened as a direct result of their job in the military that exposed them to active combat. So I just wanted to come, as I said, today and to tell people a little bit about this issue. We will continue to talk to our legislators. I have a meeting today with Congressman Warren Davidson's office, who I am running against, but I think the issue is important enough to lay aside whatever political differences we might have. And I will say this, James, I know you are a Republican. You voted Republican your whole life.
I've been I'm not truly, but most of the time I went more on the Republican side, but now I look at that we should come together.
We absolutely should.
And, because there's a lot of veterans that's not getting anything, I'm getting some,
Right.
I'm getting a lot more than most.
Because you've been able to
And I've been
continue
fighting with it,
fighting
and I
for,
have
how many
fought
years you
with it.
been fighting?
Well, I actually just accepted whatever I got until like I started having trouble at work on the new information, and probably back in the December '78, I remember going to VA, and they diagnosed me with traumatic order neurosis, but at that time, they wouldn't service connect you for a mental disability unless you was like shell shock within a year after you got out. They actually sent my case to Cleveland, sent my case to Washington, asking them that these guys are coming back being diagnosed with traumatic order neurosis, and yet we can't service connect them. And they said that the VA doctors are diagnosing them with this, and they actually sent my case, and some others to Washington. In 1981 or 82, they finally come out with post-traumatic stress disorder. So they actually had to service connect mine back to 1978, because although there wasn't a service connection for it, my claim was active, so I probably got the earliest effective date for PTSD.
And you weren't out just looking for money. You weren't just, trying to find benefits and trying to get out of the workforce, right?
The OIBL tried to get me to retire from about 1985. They even told the VA we're going to keep on medical retirement in '85, and they had me rated like 30% at that time, even though I was having a struggle.
And you were trying to stay in the workforce.
When they retired me, I filed a complaint against them that I wanted to stay in the workforce. But, I didn't know I had as much problem as I did. Well, in some things, like you say, get loud noises, some people, they found out that you get easily upset. There was guys at work that would set off firecrackers, hide my tools and things. And
Just to harass you.
Just to harass me, because they couldn't see that I had a problem. And so, but when I look at it, Ohio Bell did make a small company could have not made the reasonable accommodations for me. So, but then once I got that retired, the VA wouldn't give me my 100%. I retired in '89. I was drawing Social Security in 1990. And the VA for PTSD, and the VA was not going. I had to go to the FBI. You would not believe, because they said you can't get unemployability for a mental disorder.
Right. And so the stigma is still with us today. Even from the statements that President Trump made, we know that there's still a stigma associated with traumatic brain injuries. And so we want to see that ended. I know with Warren Davidson, Congressman Davidson, who I'm running against, that he once said that individuals who suffered with certain kinds of injuries in the military, like PTSD and those mental disorders, that they are moochers and freeloaders, I think was the example that he used. I wanted to bring some context to this and to really show the real life stories of people who have suffered as a result of some of these injuries, these brain injuries, so that people understand we're not talking about people who are just trying to get over on the system, as it has been said, but we want to help change this narrative. We want to help people understand what's at stake here. So thanks a lot, everyone, for tuning in and listening, and we will keep you informed